I'm Decent Dan for Project Holy Cow.
I'm Nifty Nicola for Project Holy Cow.
Hi everyone, I'm Terrific Teresa for Project Holy Cow.
I'm Mediocre Maddie for Project Holy Cow.
Hey, I am Moving Madeline for Project Holy Cow. Hey guys, it's Maddie here. I'm meeting up with my friend Teresa and she's gonna tell us a little bit more about Project Holy Cow. Come on, let's go. Hey Teresa.
Oh hi Maddie, didn't see you there. So this is a little more about Project Holy Cow. Hi y'all. So Project Holy Cow focuses on the air pollutants produced from the beef cattle industry. Well, why is this important?
By far, the United States is both the greatest producer and consumer of beef. About 58% of the protein that we consume is from livestock, and 12% of that comes from the beef industry.
The demand for beef is only expected to increase as the population increases. There is a projected 70% increase in demand for meat, milk, and eggs. Therefore, the livestock industry must produce more food using fewer inputs as competition for land, water, and energy intensifies.
In 2016, the amount of beef consumed in the United States was about 26 billion pounds, and the amount consumed per capita was about 56 pounds.
So, there are many misconceptions regarding the environmental impacts of the beef cattle industry. Project Holy Cow aims to understand the public's knowledge of the beef industry through conducting surveys and interviews.
Are you vegan or vegetarian, and what inspired your decision?
Nah, I'm not.
None of the above.
Yes, I'm a vegetarian. Usually it was like for animal rights reasons, but as I learned more about it, I think the primary reason that for me to remain vegetarian is because of the environmental impact of the meat industry and how detrimental it is to the natural environment.
I'm a vegan.
And what led to that decision?
It was a combination of like health reasons, environmental reasons, and just animal rights.
So, do you eat beef? And if you do, how often?
Yeah, I eat beef fairly.
How often would you say you eat beef per week?
Probably 3-4 times a week.
Yes, I do.
And how often do you eat beef?
Probably twice-ish a week.
Do you know of any major air pollutions that are affected by the cattle industry?
Not in the slightest. Not any idea. Not in the absolute slightest. Okay. Well,
2 summers ago, I watched this documentary called Cowspiracy, and I learned that meat, like the agricultural industry, is like the main cause of air pollution.
I don't know very many specifics. I know it creates like methane and other greenhouse gases.
I know that cows produce methane, and so by having huge amounts of like huge farms with cows on them that you use for meat or even dairy, that's a big thing that led me to veganism.
In addition, the team has interviewed environmental faculty as well as industry professionals to gauge their knowledge on the subject.
I'm Professor Elliot Douglas, career professor in environmental engineering now.
Paul Chaddock. I am a retired professor, associate professor.
Todd Thrift. I teach the beef classes here at the University of Florida, cow-calf management, feedlot management, and classes in feedlot or beef cattle nutrition.
So how long have you been in your specified field?
So I'm trained as a materials engineer. I did work on that. I worked at Los Alamos National Lab in New Mexico. When I came here, I was in the materials engineering department here for 19 years. But then I started doing engineering education research and that actually fit better here in environmental engineering?
I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 1969, and then I went into the Air Force. I was actually a chemical engineer by bachelor's degree at Manhattan College in New York. Then I went into the Air Force. I was an ROTC cadet in college, and I spent 3 years there being an environmental engineer. I was enthused about that work, so when I came out of the Air Force, I went to work as an environmental engineer for 11 years for 8 years.
Do you know of any major air pollutions that are affected by the cattle industry?
Yeah, no, I don't really know much other than just like general reading.
I'm not versed in the topic, but I can guess, perhaps. So when we talk about beef cattle production, I guess we're talking about from managing the cattle to the slaughterhouse. And I would imagine that there would be a variety of odors produced in that, some from, well, gaseous emissions that might be inorganic and inorganics.
There's a lot of misinformation about pollutants in the industry and what goes on in the beef cattle industry. Most of our cows are out on grass, and certainly cows will produce methane, but it's a very small percentage of the total methane produced. A lot of people talk about air pollutants in one segment of our industry, the feedlot segment, where they would actually not be on grass, but rather be in a dirt pen in a feedlot, where at times there can be dust or particulate matter that will become airborne, and there can be some issues with air quality from that standpoint. That's probably the major one. The methane one doesn't really ruffle my feathers very much.
The primary pollutants produced by the beef cattle industry are particulate matter, methane, and carbon dioxide.
Methane is produced from enteric fermentation and is released from cattle belching, not farting.
Which do you think is better for air quality, feedlot or grass-fed cows?
I don't know, like, what the difference is.
Okay, I'm gonna go with the feedlot would be better.
Okay.
Because I think grass-fed would, I guess, the grass would have to like grow again. And
Maybe a feedlot, they're like contained in a smaller area, which is less like humane for the animals, but I would imagine, I don't know much about this, but I would imagine that you'd have like more containment, so you might avoid like some of the runoff maybe of their waste.
Feedlot beef and grass-fed beef differ in a variety of ways. Grass-fed cattle eat exclusively grass, whereas feedlot cattle eat grain as well. Grass-fed beef, although it may sound better, both has higher methane production and requires higher land use.
From the majority standpoint, if we talk about dust or particulate matter, a lot of those feed yards will use sprinklers to mitigate that, to keep the dust down, to control the dust. Some have planted trees around the lots in an area that doesn't traditionally have trees to prevent the wind erosion that would occur from picking that particulate matter up. They do a lot of pen maintenance, scraping and cleaning the pens to help with that. From a methane standpoint, there are some things we can feed in the industry, and particularly when you look at the feedlot industry, we will feed a product called Rumensin that actually will reduce the amount of methane to a certain degree. It improves the efficiency of feed utilization for those animals, and so that's one of the things that can be done. And actually, as you shift animals to a grain diet like they would be on in the feedlot, you would have less methane produced overall.
Okay.
And some cottonseed hulls, some whole corn. There looks to be a little bit of brewer's grains in there. And this is a protein pellet that contains their minerals, their vitamins, Rumensin, all those kinds of things. It ups the protein. The diet's predominantly corn. The corn contains a lot of energy, a lot of carbs, a little bit of oil, and that promotes rapid gain. This is a feedlot that we have right here on campus. It's about a 100-head feedlot. It would differ from a traditional lot. We would have 10 or 15 head in a 2-acre pasture, whereas a traditional feedlot might have 50 or 60 in that area. And so our stocking density is much lower. We do that in order to keep the grass here on this particular lot. From a environmental standpoint, we're much better off if we can keep some green space right here in town. We don't have a need to stock it that heavy, and so this feed yard would not look like many feed yards in terms that we actually have grass growing in the yard.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So do you have any possible solutions to this problem, policy or otherwise?
Well, I feel like with any real change enact, it has to be societal driven. You're not going to get any lasting change without a definite societal change, regardless of what the problem is. But in the beginning, it should definitely be regulation or policy based at the local, state, and national level.
And what sort of societal shift do you think there needs to be, whether it's a small change over time or something drastic?
Well, I feel like any societal change will most likely start with like a countercultural movement into a small change over time, becoming more accepted.
The media is like a big way to address, because like I learned like nothing about air pollution in, well, not nothing, but I don't learn a lot about air pollution in school. So I think just like informing the public about like maybe like Meatless Monday.
I would really have to start with policy change, because I mean societal shifts are also important, but they could take a lot more time.
But I definitely think education is key in teaching the public the impacts they're having.
Pollution control. There could be sort of like they talk about with carbon tax, like a some sort of like pollutant tax on beef, maybe. I don't know. And so then basically, you know, it's like a social change because it costs more money.
Now, if you have an enclosed facility, you might be able to better manage the off-gas from that facility. And the same would be true if in the slaughterhouse, not open, so you have a contained facility where through various exhaust fans you could push the air through some technology that would clean it.
What problem do you think those in the industry, whether it be small scale or large scale feedlots, would face in enforcing these regulations?
But then you have the social issue now of the people, the workers, the people who work there. So how do you deal with that? Is always the question when we're talking about shifts in economy like that.
Well, I think, again, we just touched on that with the financial burden for them. You know, they would likely, there should be a best management practice. And I mean, the individual cattle manager is not going to go and start looking at the literature and figuring all of that out. Somebody has got to come and give them good guidance. And that usually comes with some type of regulation. I mean, I think it's inappropriate for a regulatory agency to come out and say, this is the regulation and you figure out how to meet it. They should be providing best management practices and best technologies.
How receptive do you think cattle managers would be to more regulatory oversight for the industry?
Cattle producers as a whole are not receptive to any regulation. They are an independent lot. That doesn't mean they won't comply with it. But more regulation in the past has often not meant a better end product. It's meant more paperwork, it's meant more problems, it's meant more cost without an improvement in an environmental outcome, so to speak. Now that obviously varies depending on the subject matter you're talking about. But as a whole, cattlemen are skeptical of some of those regulations because some of the regulations are not science-based. If it's shown that they're very science-based and that they can be put into implication and impact the bottom line, then I think they would be very open to it. But lots of the regulations that are in place are not science-based.
Do you think environmental issues will ever persuade you to change how you eat?
More than likely.
100%. After that documentary, I tried to do Meatless Monday.
That's a tougher one. I don't eat. I guess I do. I don't know. That's a good question, right? So that's always the issue with these kinds of social questions, right? It's something needs to change until I have to do it.
Anything else you wish students or the general public were aware of?
It's something I struggle with students all the time. I also teach a class called Intro to Animal Science, where, and unfortunately, this is a real issue, but everything you read on the internet is not necessarily a fact. There's a lot of good sources of information out there about the impacts of cattle on the environment. They're actually huge upcyclers. We feed a tremendous amount of stuff to cattle that you cannot eat, and they basically act like a landfill, except instead of the products going into a landfill, they can go into a cow, things like molasses or cottonseed hulls or soybean hulls or whole cottonseed or distiller's grains or brewer's grains, and they can turn that into beef that you and I can't eat. And that's a huge benefit. Actually, cattle are some of nature's biggest environmentalists, if the truth is known. And most of the ranchers that I work with are really the best first-class environmentalists that I deal with on a regular basis.
I think that solutions to these problems are going to be coming from students like you guys. So I'm looking to the future with some optimism.
Hey. So how do you feel about air pollution?
Yes.
Look at all these chickens.